Did you know that trauma can be encoded in our genetic makeup? Yes, our challenging experiences can be recorded in our DNA and passed down through the generations. How does this even happen? And what the heck can we do about it? Let's go through this in simple everyday terms. I'm Nicola, and for over 25 years, I've been finding ways to release my issues and break my patterns of pain so I don't repeat the cycle. And I'd love to help you do the same. So in one of my previous careers, I was a geneticist. You know that classic image they always use of a scientist in a lab wearing a lab coat, using a pipette? Yeah, that was me. I was always fascinated by the mechanisms of the human body. I really find the human body to be an incredible machine, fascinating systems, and I love genetics, the idea that this DNA in us could explain what happens. But I was also really interested in the behaviours that happen in populations at the entire group level, things that are transmitted beyond just through an individual and their experience. Which is why I was absolutely captivated by the discovery that trauma could be passed down through the altered expression of genes. The most well-known research on this is the survivors of the Holocaust, and their children show permanent changes in their stress hormone response, in their risk of mental illness, and in the expression of specific genes related to the stress response, related to neuroplasticity, which is how easily the brain changes and grows, and just generally in metabolism. And these same effects have also been seen in Native American populations exposed to trauma and stress, in people who've been exposed to war and the stresses of that kind of situation, and to babies who were in the womb during the Dutch famine. They show these same stress-related changes to their genetics. And they've also created this in mice models. So they have shown that the sperm, the RNA coming out of a sperm from a stressed male mouse, when it's injected into a normal healthy embryo, actually passes on these stress responses. We see changes in behaviour in those baby mice that result from that sperm from the stressed male mouse, and we see the metabolic changes. So something is being passed on that changes the experience of these individuals. So how does this even happen? There are three main ways that we think this happens, and we're still figuring all this stuff out. But the first one is something called epigenetics. So your genes are a string of letters that encode for all the proteins that are made in your body and how your body functions. Epigenetics are things that happen outside of those genes. They're not part of that string of letters, but they affect how those string of letters work. So epigenetic happens in this instance through something called methylation. So there are particular molecules that are attached to the DNA that change the way that that gene works. The second way that it seems to happen is through something called chromatin. Chromatin is a molecule that DNA is wrapped around. So in every one of your cells you have your DNA, and in order to make the chromosomes that the DNA is packed into, when it's not doing something like dividing or being modified, it's packaged around these molecules, and these molecules are modified under situations of stress and trauma so that the packaging changes, meaning that those genes are accessed differently and they're not being used in the same way because they're being packaged differently. And the third way seems to be through RNA. So RNA is what DNA is turned into in order for it to actually do something useful. And so it seems that there are changes in the RNA as well that can be used to transmit these effects as a result of stress and trauma. And there are two main pathways this seems to happen. The first one is when it's passed from the traumatized individual to the immediate children, and this is called intergenerational trauma, and it's confounded by the fact that the traumatized individual may also have changes to their behavior as a result of that experience. So you have both genetic changes as well as behavioral changes that can then be passed on to the immediate children. But you also have these effects being passed on to the grandchildren, or transgenerational transmission to the grandchildren who haven't had a traumatized parent and who haven't had exposure to the trauma in any way, but they're still showing these changes to their DNA and to their gene expression, which is absolutely fascinating that that's possible. But these seem to be the mechanisms by which it happens. Some of these forms of genetic modification seem to fade over the generations, and some of them seem to amplify. So we're still really trying to figure out what the mechanisms are and what makes one form of modification disappear and one seem to get worse over time. So what can we do about this? Well, the good news is that there are some key periods during development where we seem to go through a process of what's called erasure. So the DNA is being reconfigured, and a lot of these modifications are just removed completely. They're just erased, and so they no longer have an effect. And it seems like there's only specific locations or specific genes and specific types of modifications that seem to persist. And the strategies that we need to look at in order to address these effects need to revolve around supporting the individuals who have the traumatic or stressful experience into reducing the chances that this stuff is passed on, and then to look at reversing these effects when they do happen. One of the key strategies seems to be around early intervention, so providing support to the traumatised individuals but also to their children, so making sure that we get in there as early as possible to minimise those impacts, particularly during those key developmental stages. And also understanding that we need to look at therapy and treatments across generations. We can't just stay focused on the individuals who had that experience. We need to understand that there are flow-on effects, and we need to take the whole family into account when we are looking at treatments and strategies. And also learning to manage the stress response and the hormones that flood when we are having an intense experience subsequently. Learning how to develop our emotional regulation can be really key, and I've got a whole guide that takes you through some quick ways that you can improve your self-regulation when you do get into those situations that you might want to download to help you with that. But basically increasing our resilience, the ability that we have to bounce back from difficult situations by managing our emotional and our stress responses. And then the fourth strategy seems to be around promoting brain plasticity. Anything that we do that promotes the brain's ability to grow and learn and change seems to also help counter these effects, and there are actually many different things that can affect this. So some of the treatments that have been explored and seem to be effective for this are biochemical. There's a number of enzymes that have been trialled that seem to have an effect at reversing these genetic changes. There's also some supplements that seem to be really key at certain stages of development that can have a really positive effect on this. Even psychedelics have been explored as a way to reverse some of these changes. And then there are psychotherapy approaches that seem to really have an effect. Things like EMDR, NET, which is narrative exposure therapy, multi-family therapy, cognitive behavioural therapy or CBT, or any trauma-focused PTSD type psychotherapy seems to have been shown to actually reverse these methylation effects. These epigenetic changes are being reversed by these therapies, which is absolutely fascinating to me as well. The third treatment that seems to be quite effective is environmental enrichment. So basically anything that stimulates the senses, the mind or the body seems to be really effective at actually reversing the impact of these stressful experiences, whether that is mental stimulation, activities, having a really positive nurturing environment, just a really enriched, active, stimulating environment can be really helpful. And it seems to not only reverse the methylation but prevent transmission, so this is really powerful as well. And then lifestyle modifications can also be really effective treatments for this, so things like mindfulness, things like meditation, and the research shows that transcendental meditation is one of the most effective at actually reversing these effects. I've got a whole guide with the 10 most common meditation techniques that you might find helpful if you want to try adding meditation to your practices to help with this. And then things just to support our general well-being, things like eating a healthy diet, getting enough exercise, getting enough sleep, and having social support. All of these things that support our well-being seem to help reverse the effects of this genetically modified trauma response. So it's really important to understand, look at all these strategies and treatments, that your genes are not a life sentence. No matter what's written into the letters of your DNA, it is not set in stone. There are things that you can do that will actually change which genes are expressed when, where, how, and as a result, your health, your well-being, your behaviours, and what you pass on to your kids. You have the power to change what happens next. And if you'd like to learn more about how to improve your emotional regulation as you try and deal with this, watch this video next. And I'll see you in the next one.